Hi, I'm Stephen.
And I'm Celine from the Cult Hackers podcast.
So I'm a former member of a high control group, otherwise known as a cult, who left when I was about 30. That's about the time my daughter was born. That's you, Celine.
We explore what it's like to be in a cult and leave one. We interview former members and leading cult experts. And we also talk about the long journey of making sense of the world afterwards.
Yeah, that's a journey that you've witnessed and helped me with.
I'm a media graduate interested in the place cults have in our society.
And I'm an organisational psychologist these days with an interest in leadership and who also studies cults and cultic groups.
There's a new episode every week where we look at cults from every angle and attempt to crack the cult code.
So search for Cult Hackers on your favourite podcast app and catch up with us every Saturday.
Hello listeners and welcome to part 2 of this week's mini-series on the Cult Vault. I'm your speaker Casey, and in part 1 of this QAnon coverage, Mike Rothschild joined me to discuss conspiracy theories, his work in journalism, and his recent book, The Storm is Upon Us, How QAnon Became a Movement, Cult and Conspiracy Theory of Everything. In this second and final part, we will look at QAnon in detail, and the events that have occurred since the birth of this movement. For early access to full-length and ad-free episodes, please visit patreon.com/thecultvault and join me from as little as £1 a month. Now, here is Mike Rothschild. The other book that I have, which is called The World's Worst Conspiracy Theories, The World's Worst Conspiracies. When I first read that title, I was like, what are the world's worst conspiracies? But now after reading your other book, I realised that you probably mean the world's worst conspiracies because nothing in this book is true.
Right. Yes. These are the things that have stuck around in our culture the most, that have driven the most disinformation, the most grifting for the people pushing them. And of course, they're still doing it. I mean, you look at Netflix, at least in the US, I mean, there's all this hubbub about this Ancient Apocalypse series. And it's just more ancient alien stuff. It's just more like, oh, people in the old days, they couldn't build pyramids. They needed aliens to do it. I mean, it's actually super racist to be pushing ideas like that, to assume that the people of ancient Egypt could not build pyramids or the people of ancient Greece couldn't build dams. But it's another one of those things where we look at it and go, well, that can't be right. That doesn't just happen. There must be some other explanation. And I think so often, if we just took a step back and say, no, things can actually happen outside of our experience. Things do just happen. And there doesn't need to be a salacious or conspiratorial explanation for it. And it's actually more interesting if there isn't. In The World's Worst Conspiracies, you talk about the Clinton body count, which is a conspiracy theory that existed pre-QAnon. So again, that tells you that the Clintons are not new to having these types of accusations thrown their way. And I think that only goes again into kind of disproving QAnon's originality in that way. Right. The idea of the Clintons as sort of these stone cold mass murderers, this is not even an internet thing. I mean, this was the early 90s when this anti-Clinton filmmaker named Linda Thompson came up with this long list of people who died mysteriously after being around the Clintons. And of course, the thing that to me proves that the Clinton body count is not real is that Linda Thompson herself lived for a decade after her body count conspiracy came out. I think she overdosed. But we're still, to this day, anybody who dies who has any connection to the Clintons, I mean, like somebody they had lunch with once 30 years ago and they die of old age, like, oh, the Clintons got another one. And it becomes this kind of conspiracy theory that just powers itself. Most people who push this stuff have no idea where it came from. It's just a list that gets passed around on the internet. The same way there are lists of Kennedy assassination witnesses who died mysteriously or died prematurely. People connected to Barack Obama, people connected to 9/11. I mean, you put a bunch of people on a list and say, well, they died mysteriously. What does that even mean? What does died mysteriously mean?
Does it mean that they, died before their time? Well, who's to say what that means? And now, of course, we have with COVID, anytime a celebrity dies, there's a contingent of people who immediately say, "Oh, it was a vaccine." Like somebody who's 90 dies, they're like, "Oh, did they get their booster?" Like, come on, like people just die. But this is the conspiratorial mindset that nothing ever just happens.
So I'm releasing this episode on January the 6th. There's a bonus episode in sort of retrospection for what happened on January the 6th when Trump was about to lose power. And Trump is a key player in the QAnon belief system. He is somebody that's been put on this pedestal as a sort of like a
God
leader,
like a messianic figure. Yeah,
absolutely. And he's kind of been like elected by the people to almost lead QAnon without doing any of the pulling of the strings in the background, at least at first.
Yeah.
So can you just talk us through, how did January the 6th happen? How did it go from, and I know that we can't go into all the detail. I mean, that's why there's a whole book about it. But 4chan through to January the 6th, there's a huge like gap of stuff. And again, it's kind of like that. You don't go straight to Xenu or the the total bridge to freedom. But January the 6th was wild.
Yes, it really was. And so much of January 6th happened because of the same narrative that QAnon was pushing. And of course, that the people behind QAnon were pushing as well. I mean, somebody like Ron Watkins was posting on Twitter relentlessly about January 6th. He was, everybody needs to show up, tell them we won't take it, take power back, all this stuff. And, the idea of QAnon is this kind of people's uprising, like the people are taking power back. And they're working with the military and with Trump, and like Trump is the hero of the people, and we're going to get rid of all these evil people, and the stolen election is going to be undone, and we're going to set it all right. And of course, for a year of posting, Q had been saying the election's going to be stolen, it's going to be rigged. Here are all the ways it's going to be rigged. Here's all the things the deep state's going to do. Joe Biden is a decrepit husk who can barely speak. His campaign rallies get 10 people. Donald Trump is a genius. He's full of energy. His rallies are giant parties with tens of thousands of people. The yard signs and the Twitter followers, like there's no way Trump can lose except if the deep state steals the election. Well, Trump loses. So the deep state stole the election. This wasn't something that just started on election night with Trump making that speech about how, frankly, we won the election. That doesn't just happen. It's a progression. It's reinforcement over and over and over and over again of this is what they're going to do. This is how you'll know it's happened. Here's how we fight back. And then it happens. And then people like Q and like the biggest Q promoters, they look like oracles. They look like they knew it was all going to happen. So now we have to listen to them when they tell us how we're going to take power back. And it was driven by Trump, by the grievance, by the weaponizing of this, and by the money making. Immediately there was an industry of these people who figured out how to make money off of Trump losing the election. So it was really this perfect storm of this kind of lack of ability to believe that Trump could ever lose an election, the constant conspiracy theories, the scamming, the grifting, and then the people who really did train to do this. We're really seeing this with people like the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys, that they really did show up to try to stop the certification of the electoral votes. Now, it wasn't everybody. A lot of the people who broke into the Capitol were really just kind of milling around, and you can see on their faces, they were like, wait, how did this happen? What am I doing here? I should probably leave because I'm going to get arrested if I don't. And they made no effort to hide their identity. This wasn't a sort of a giant military operation, but for some people it was. So you had a bunch of people there who had very different goals. Some people had the goal of overthrowing the government. Some people just had the goal of taking a piece of paper off Nancy Pelosi's desk. And it was a storm where everybody had their own vision of what they wanted to happen. And movements like QAnon really work that way, and that everybody has their own personal vision of it. So if a part of it comes true, you're like, well, I was right. This whole thing happened the way it was all foretold. So it was this constant drumbeat of conspiracy theories and grievance and Trump worship that came together in the most toxic, violent way possible, because I think a lot of law enforcement in the US at the time, and maybe still, really viewed this as like online stuff. Like, oh, these are just internet posters. This doesn't mean anything. This is just social media. It's not real. Well, a lot of it isn't, but some of it was, and you never know what's real and what's not until it's actually happening.
Were there deaths related to that day? Did people lose their lives?
Oh yeah, there were multiple deaths. There was Ashley Babbitt, the woman who was shot and killed by a Capitol police officer trying to climb through the broken window into the speaker's lobby. And of course, she was hugely Q-pilled. You can see from her social media, she thought that this was the storm. She flew from San Diego to Washington, D.C. That's not a cheap flight. She really was a true believer. There were other people. There were a couple of people who were trampled in the crowd. Of course, Capitol police officers who died of their injuries, who've taken their own lives afterwards. I mean, the damage that this has done to the people involved with it is considerable. I mean, never mind the damage it's done to democracy.
It isn't at this point just something that exists online. And I think that we're seeing more and more that groups are meeting up and taking action with Q-related activities on the streets. There's some groups that you talk about in Dallas, Texas specifically. There was a group around the whole JFK conspiracy. Yes. They lined the streets for, I think it was a couple of weeks.
Yeah, and they're still there. This is the -48. This is the group I write about in the afterword to the paperback of the book. These are the people being led by a cult leader. Absolutely no doubt that he's a cult leader. It's a small group of people. It's mostly middle-aged, a lot of women, and they've left their lives behind. They've left their families behind. They're subsisting on donations. They're decoding numerology, and they're going to Trump events. And at one point there was some real concern that they were, drinking from some sort of COVID cure from a communal bowl, and like the cult leader is being left alone with kids to decode Trump speeches and, find the codes. I mean, it's really, really troubling stuff. And for a while, sort of the last couple months of 2021, there was a real thought of like, are we looking at a mass suicide here? Now, fortunately, it hasn't come to that, because the group is kind of incompetently led, and there have been splinter groups, and they've been traveling around going to Trump rallies, and the leaders are making too much money to, pull the plug on their flock. But of course, you're seeing a very similar thing in Canada with this Queen of Canada lady who is doing the same thing, who's like positioning herself as like the real monarch, and like telling people, don't pay your electric bill, don't pay your heating bill, don't pay your mortgage, because we're going to get, whatever it is, whatever the fake money is, the deliveries of the prosperity, like the Nasara scam does. The same thing. And people are posting online of like, my electricity got turned off, but it's fine because it's all going to work out great. Like, people are destroying their lives because of this stuff. And I think the easiest thing for us to do is to just look at them and go, they're idiots, they're crazy, they need medication, and no one in their family should ever talk to them again. And it's a lot harder to look at them and say, well, why are they doing this? What are they looking for here? What aren't they getting from their life, from their job, from their family, from their spouse, that the cult leader looking for JFK Jr. or the Queen of Canada, what are they getting from this? And is there a way that they can leave it behind? And that's very hard to do that.
Absolutely, especially when you talked about this could be the one thing that individuals have been searching for such a long time. And on the flip side of that, it can also be all that an individual has, especially if those bridges are all burned with loved ones and rent and electricity bills,
Right.
and then you're going to be getting more and more warnings through the post and
Right.
fees and that stuff is kind of like a snowball, isn't it? The
Yeah.
snowball effect. So you've got a group waiting for the return of John F. Kennedy and his son. They believe that they never really died, and they're going to roll
Yeah.
down the streets of Dallas, Texas. And then on the flip side of that, you do have this woman in Canada who is telling people to bear arms and to protect themselves in a way that sounds quite similar to what we heard about with the Branch Davidians.
Yep.
And what David Koresh was telling his followers when it came to his doomsday prophecies and protecting everything that they stood for. So it's not a stretch to say that there could be mass suicides, that there could be mass shootings and things related to these different chapters of QAnon that have come into fruition that are being led by charismatic leaders,
Yeah.
even though QAnon itself has Trump as the figurehead, but not necessarily as the organized leader of the group.
Right. And that's the real danger. It's not the kind of mass uprising. It's here's this tiny little group of 20 people and nobody knows anything about it. And then they all kill themselves, or they all kill somebody else because they're trying to do what cults do: hasten the end times, purge the non-believers, whatever, the standard cult stuff that we've always had. It's the kind of thing where, because they're so bizarre and they seem like they're all crazy, we don't want to engage with it. We don't want to seriously look at it. We want to make fun of it because it's just so weird, and we smugly think, oh, that could never be me, that would never happen to me. But you don't know that. You don't know what you might be susceptible to, what might find you at just the right moment of vulnerability. Maybe 99 times out of 100, you would look the other way and you would think that this is nuts. But maybe that one time you just went through something really terrible. You lost your job, you lost your spouse, you're on your own. And that one moment of weakness of like, oh, this looks like it might make me feel better. This looks like it might connect me with some people who are going through the same thing. And like you've been saying with Scientology, it's never just like, here's the volcanoes and the alien overlord. It's do you feel stressed out? Well, yeah. It's like, so that's the thing. It gets you by asking you the very simple question, not by bombarding you with the numerology and the bizarre codes and concepts. It's just the human frailty that everybody is going through at some point in their life.
Even I have friends that tell me that they're not going to get vaccinated because they know someone who's had a bad reaction to the vaccine. So there's your confirmation bias in something so simple that is intrinsically tied up with the Q movement. And even just taking that part is interesting to look at. And things that you've mentioned historically that have happened that are almost happening again with the Q movement, with things like people not paying their bills. When you think about William Miller and Charles Taze Russell and individuals who had doomsday prophecies where they encouraged their followers to sell all their earthly goods and everything they've ever owned because the end times are imminent and the world is going to end on this date. And when those things never happened, I know that there were some things that happened with William Miller, and then you get Ellen G. White and the Seventh-day Adventists, and then eventually the Branch Davidians. I mean, if you follow that rabbit hole all the way down. But it's another example of how even when prophecies don't come true, the loyalty and the devotion from the followers wrapped up in the belief system, it's still there. The group will find a way to explain away what's happened, and oh no, we were wrong, it's actually going to be in 2 years from today, or whatever reason that they give. And this is a staple part of Q as well.
Yes, it's very much the classic book When Prophecy Failed, and I really recommend everybody read that book to understand why people stick with things that are so obviously not true. And there will be people who will walk away from it, but there will be other people who say, I don't have anywhere else to go. I've sold all my stuff. I'm, the power company turned my power off already. Nobody in my family will talk to me. What am I supposed to do? Go back to them and say, you were right, I'm an idiot, please forgive me? People don't want to do that. Nobody wants to admit that they were wrong. And even more than that they got lied to, that they got fooled, they got taken in by a charlatan. So you just keep going. You can't go back because you have no way to go back. You have nowhere to go back to. All you have is forward, because, hey, maybe it'll happen. Maybe the windfall will come. Maybe the UFO will actually land, and then I'm going to be right. Then this is all going to be worth it. And if I walk away, then it wasn't worth it. It's that tiny little chance that it's going to turn out to be okay overrides everything else, because you have nowhere left to go.
With the insurrection, it felt to me, kind of witnessing things unfold from over here in England, that Trump had kind of heard about Q and its theories, and then kind of started to retweet some of it, and entertaining the idea a little bit, which got a lot of the followers excited about that validation coming from their figurehead. But on the day that the election was, in air quotes, stolen,
Right,
it felt like he really used that devotion from followers and deployed them in the way that I was talking about earlier. Again, you said that there's no way to say whether that's true or not, but it's almost like he knew if he said, this is what you need to do today, that his followers would go, okay, then we'll just do it.
Yeah, he absolutely knew that. And you find it in a lot of the Trump inner circle. Like, they already knew that this wasn't going to go anywhere. They already knew that this was all crazy and that there was no chance that the election was going to be overturned. They've said a lot of that in court documents since then. But of course, at the time, they really were putting out there that they believed that it was going to happen, and that we have to, right this injustice. And Trump has this particular hold over people. So when he said, be in DC on the 6th, it's going to be wild, he knew people would show up. He knew that people would be there for him to try this last ditch effort at doing something. And of course, a lot of these people say, what even was supposed to happen? They're going to break into the Capitol, and then what? What are they going to do? Kidnap Mike Pence and prevent the votes from being certified? I mean, there wasn't any way that the day was going to end with Trump being back in office. Like, it's just not possible. But you throw everything you have at this one last chance, because the alternative is Joe Biden being president and Trump losing, and that's unacceptable to so many of these people.
One of the things you spoke about in The Storm is Upon Us is, when looking at whether the QAnon movement can be classed as a cult, you have to look at the components of what make up cultic groups. And one of those things is a charismatic leader that organizes the group. And that's one of the things that really is an earmark that's recognizable across groups. QAnon doesn't have that specifically at the overhead level. But you talked about something that is different with Q, is the participation element that makes it so different. And I wondered if you could just talk the listeners through what that means.
Sure. So many classic conspiracy theories and the sort of classic literature of conspiracy theories is very much about what is being done to you by the powerful people, the Federal Reserve, the insiders, the Freemasons, the Jewish cabal, whatever it is. With QAnon, it's different, because Q really encouraged people to decode these posts and kind of run with them in their own way. So much of what we think of as the sort of the foundational mythology of QAnon, the idea of, John F. Kennedy Jr. still being alive, or the elites and adrenochrome, that's not mentioned in Q. Q never talks about that stuff. It's the people who believed in Q and made up their own aspects of it. So it's almost it's a participatory cult where the leader is like, yeah, bring whatever you want, sure. Well, no idea is too dumb to be incorporated into this. So you have a movement where people take their own version of it by interpreting the drops in a certain way. They make memes, they make videos, they make podcasts, they share these things with other people, and they really see themselves, fighting in the trenches of this secret silent war. And if they just red pill enough, sleeping normal people, then there's going to be an uprising and we're going to take power back. And so much of it is just about power in the face of what seems like their powerlessness. Is saying, I am important, I matter, and my way of life is not going to be canceled, and I'm going to fight back. And that's what so much of this is just fighting back against what you see as the sort of onslaught of unstoppable liberalism.
Well, Trump lost the election, and it looks like he's losing a lot of support and traction in the lead up to the next election as well. But QAnon is still prevalent. Where do they go from here? Do you have any predictions, or can you see any trends on where the movement is going itself?
It's an interesting time in this movement because this movement tends to coalesce around one big idea. And for a long time, it was the storm and the mass arrests and all that stuff. And then once Biden was in office, it was the election was stolen. We got to get Trump back in. We got to expose the fraud. So you got the lawsuits and the audits. And of course, COVID is baked into all of that as well. Now that you've had the Republicans do really poorly in the midterms, and especially the really Q-pilled election denier candidates especially did really badly, substantially underperformed other Republicans. It's a little bit of a transitional period with QAnon because it kind of hasn't found the next thing yet. And some of them are really excited about Trump running again. Others don't really want him to run again, and they're just going to steal the election again. So it's a movement that really is in transition a little bit, the way it was shortly after Biden's inauguration. And then they really doubled down on the stolen election stuff and just kept pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. So that may be what they do more, but it also feels like you kind of did that and it didn't work. So you kind of need to find something else. But these people are not the most logical, strategic thinkers. They tend to cling to bad ideas. And then when the idea is proven to be bad, they just kind of grab onto it harder. So I don't know. I don't know where this is going to go. I don't know what they're going to latch onto, but they're going to latch onto something, and it's not going anywhere. And for the moment, it's kind of latching on to, hey, we haven't talked about the Jews in a while, but that may fade out as something else comes up to take its place, and we just don't really know yet.
After finishing the book, speaking to people that are former kind of QAnon believers, and also speaking with individuals who have loved ones that are wrapped up in the belief system, what advice do you have for those individuals that are trying to find a way to communicate with somebody that just will not hear them on any level?
Yeah, it's really hard. And it's, it's something I still struggle with. It's one of the reasons why I really wanted to write the book is like, people ask me like, how do I get through to this person? How do I get them out? And I say, I have no idea. And that's the kind of thing you need to write a book about and talk to experts about. And of course, many of the experts in this field are struggling with the same thing. For me, I guess, I tend to think that you need to keep some level of empathy. And, then people ask, well, am I supposed to be sympathetic to Nazis and insurrectionists and racists? No, absolutely not. You do not need to both sides the belief system because it's abhorrent. But if there is somebody in your life that is really sucked into this and you really want that person to get out, you care enough about that person to kind of keep the lines of communication open, and you haven't walked away and you haven't felt unsafe. And if you ever do feel unsafe, you ever do feel attacked by somebody, like, you have every right to walk away from that person. You do not need to keep a Q believer in your life. There is no requirement to do that. But if you want to, just keeping the lines of communication open and checking in and saying, hey, was thinking about you. I saw this thing the other day that you used to be into. Did you see that? Trying to find some kind of common ground, some kind of commonality that is not the conspiracy, that's not Q, that's not pedophiles, because you don't want to talk about that stuff. But you do want to, appeal to the human being that is still there. And if they do start to lose some faith in Q or the conspiracy, and they do feel like maybe some aspect of this does not work, if you have been that person who has stayed in their life, they might feel comfortable talking to you about it and saying, hey, look, everybody else thinks I'm nuts. You don't. I'm struggling with this. Can you help me? And maybe that can be enough to start the conversation. Then you work on getting them out of the communities and getting them offline, of unplugging them, of replacing what they got from QAnon with things that are maybe still skeptical of the media, of the official story or whatever it is, but are a much healthier way of processing that. And it's really, really difficult to do because the person who is in the movement has to want to get out. They have to want to see that there are cracks in the facade. And if they don't want to do that, then you can never get them out, because they don't want to get out, because they think you're their enemy too. And it's heartbreaking, and it's really difficult.
The word thread was used quite a lot when discussing this particular part in The Storm Is Upon Us, and it's a very similar term that's used, as I'm sure you know, in the cult community, in terms of pulling on the thread that might unweave the entire tapestry. Yeah. And it's very much the same with individuals who are perhaps doubting or questioning one part. Yeah. They've got a best friend in church, for example, who tells them that they're gay, but then the preacher from the pulpit says anyone that's gay is being influenced by the devil, for example. Just a broad example to pluck out of thin air. Sure. And then the individual thinks, well, that's my best friend. How can my best friend be evil in any way? Right. They're the best person I've ever met. They're kind, they're caring, they're sensitive, they're devoted to their faith, which doesn't make sense then. Right. If it's just that one thing, that one question, and you can ask somebody, an individual, like, okay, well, let's talk about that a little bit more, or let's unpack that. It can just be that one thing that then leads to, again, the snowball of just unpicking more and more stuff, which is very similar to the conversations you had with people that have moved away from the belief system.
Yeah, there's one thing that just doesn't sound right or doesn't make sense, or you look up that thing and you find something debunking it and you go, well, if they were wrong about that, what else are they wrong about? And that's when it falls apart, because there's always more that they were wrong about. There's always more that doesn't make sense if you really start to look at it. And if you're open to it not making sense, you have to be open to it not making sense. And you can't just write it off as like, well, they were wrong, but they had to be wrong. They had to lie to us on purpose. And Q very early on said disinformation is necessary. And it's one of the most cultic things that you can possibly say. It's saying, I'm going to lie to you sometimes, and it's going to be for your own good. And if you see through that and you say, well, if they're lying to me about this, what else are they lying to me about? And then it does all fall apart. And then you can find yourself in a place to be able to walk away from it. And that's when you have to find somebody who is willing to take that journey with you.
I think that's wonderful advice, and it's so poignant to anybody listening that's been involved in a cultic or coercively controlled environment, or with loved ones that are down those rabbit holes, that are really getting into conspiracy theories online, and running with them. It was funny what you said about Ancient Aliens, because I had a guest on the show called Andy Fellows, who has his own YouTube channel called Andy the Fellows, and he started during a really dark period of time in his life with suffering with ill mental health and a lot of the things that we've talked about in terms of seeking and wanting to be a better person and feeling disenchanted. It started with Ancient Aliens and ended
Yeah.
with Teal Swan, who was
Mm.
really feeding into that, like,
Yeah.
if you don't want to be alive, then perhaps you shouldn't be alive, which is
Right.
very dangerous to
Yes.
somebody that
Yes.
is having those thoughts and feelings. So it can start with somebody saying, you know, I'm not getting the vaccine, and then could really just, and we've seen it, and you go
Yep.
into the QAnon casualties subreddit, and it's heartbreaking, the
Yeah.
stories that are in there. People are getting divorced, people aren't allowed to see their children, people's children, like, they are dying from not getting vaccinated or
Yep.
not seeking medical care because of some parts of the QAnon movement that's coming out. So it really is a time to be having the conversation, but in a way that's compassionate and sensitive. And as Pat Ryan always says from Cult News 101, the interventionist, he says, find common ground. Like, oh, we both like the film The Matrix, for
Right.
example.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what we like about that film. And
Yeah.
once we have that common ground, perhaps we can explore some other things without it feeling like you're attacking somebody.
Right.
And again, that's something that your book does so well, is just offering individuals some ideas of ways they might approach loved ones that they feel are just unreachable at this moment in time. And by the time this episode comes out, the Q movement might have changed again. It might have morphed, and by fall of 2023, there'll be a new book for individuals to go and buy. But just before I ask you where people can find your work, I saw a tweet by you the other day which made me laugh, because there was a message board or something you were reading about conspiracy theories around Rothschild, and you said that
Yes.
there was some about the family, and then there was some about you.
Yeah. Oh, sure. There's all kinds of stuff about me, though. I'm, part of. There's people who think I'm, part of the Rothschild dynasty, and then there's other people who think I'm like controlled opposition. And the more I talk about Q, I'm actually trying to hype it up. I mean, people just make stuff up about you, and it's one of those things where you just don't know it's going to happen until it starts happening, and you're like, well, people are like rolling me into their own personal conspiracy theories, and it's weird. And it's like, it's a little like, it doesn't sit quite well with you, but it's like, okay, your stuff's getting out there, people know who you are, for better or for worse.
It's strange to go on different websites and see your name being wrapped up in the Q movement.
It's definitely strange. It's definitely like, no, not part of the family, not a trillionaire, sorry. No, I also, don't take my orders from Russian intelligence. I'm just me. Sorry, it's not that interesting,
Are you sure? I mean, you
I
can.
Well, I
can
couldn't
tell us
talk
if
about
you-
it if I couldn't talk about it if I was. But no, I'm so much more boring than people would want to believe, and that's the thing, is so much of this stuff is just like, it's not that interesting, and then people want it to be interesting, and you want a salacious story because that's more fun than just boring old real life.
So there's a number of different things that you've written, and some things on the way as well. Where can people find you and all of your work?
Sure. So my two books out now are everywhere that you can buy books. The Storm Is Upon Us is hardcover, paperback, ebook, audiobook. I'm still on Twitter. I'm fighting a good fight on Twitter, at Rothschild MD. I'm going to have some interviews coming out in the new year that will be out in TV and print, and then my next book, Jewish Space Lasers, will be out in fall of 2023, and I'll be talking all about the Rothschild conspiracy and how I am not at all part of it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Mike. I really appreciate it, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. This was great.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Take care. Bye.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
That is the end of this series on QAnon. To find Mike and his work, you can follow the links in the episode description. For early access to full-length and ad-free episodes, please visit patreon.com/thecultvault and join from as little as £1 a month. You can also contact me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram at cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker, Casey, host of the Cult Vault podcast.